Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a bit special, actually. This deep dive is tailored specifically for the awesome students in Mr. A's World History class.
That's right.
We are tackling Unit 3, the Industrial
It's a
Revolution.
huge topic.
Huge. And our mission today is really to get under the skin of the profound changes it brought to British society. We're talking about the opportunities, yes, but also the really severe hardships.
hmm
And we're aiming right at that big question, the one that's probably going to be staring you down on the Unit 3 exam. Was the Industrial Revolution ultimately more beneficial, or was it more harmful to society?
It's the central question, really, and we'll be looking at it through the eyes of people who were actually there, contemporary observers, and also through the lens of the different ideologies that sprang up because of all this change.
Exactly. It's not just dates and inventions. It's about the human story, the economic shifts, the way society itself was, well, completely remade.
Yeah, from the quiet cottage to the loud, relentless factory floor. The why and how of it all.
Okay, so let's dive in. Before we get to the factories and the smog and the cities bursting at the seams, we need to understand how Great Britain ended up being the place where this massive transformation kicked off. It wasn't just one thing, was it?
No, not at all. It was more like a perfect storm of conditions converging, several key elements falling into place.
Right, setting the stage. And the first big piece, the absolute foundation, according to our sources, was the agricultural revolution.
Absolutely indispensable. You can't really have an industrial revolution without two things happening first. You need more people, plain and simple. A bigger population means more potential workers and, crucially, more consumers for all the stuff the factories will eventually make.
Okay, more people. What's the second thing?
You need a way to shift labor. A significant chunk of that population has to move away from farming, from working the land, and become available to work in factories. If everyone's still tied to agriculture, you've got no industrial workforce.
Makes sense. You need hands for the factories. But first, you need to feed all those extra mouths, right? How do they manage that? Because without a food surplus, society just stalls.
Exactly. And that's where English farming really stepped up after 1700. It didn't just get a bit better, it became significantly more productive. A key innovation was the four-crop rotation system.
Ah, yes, the turnip and clover thing.
Precisely. Instead of leaving fields fallow, empty, to recover, farmers started rotating wheat, barley, clover, and turnips. This simple change basically doubled the amount of usable land at any one time. Huge efficiency gain.
And the clover and turnips weren't just crops, they actively improved the soil, didn't they?
They were game changers. Clover is amazing. It fixes nitrogen from the air right back into the soil, like a natural fertilizer. So no more fallow fields needed for fertility.
Wow.
And turnips, they were a vital winter feed for livestock. Before turnips, farmers had to slaughter most animals before winter because they couldn't feed them. Now they could keep more animals alive.
Which means more manure.
Exactly. More animals mean more dung, which means more natural fertilizer, which means even more fertile soil. It was this brilliant, self-reinforcing cycle. Boosted food production massively.
A virtuous cycle. Okay, so farming's getting super efficient. But there was also the enclosure movement happening alongside this, which sounds less positive for many rural people.
Yeah, that's the flip side. Enclosure meant fencing off common lands, areas villagers used for grazing animals or growing a few vegetables.
Right, the shared land.
Exactly. Landowners enclosed these areas to create larger, more efficient private farms, often using those new rotation methods. But for the poorer families who relied on that common land, it was devastating. They lost their livelihood, their traditional way of life.
Leading to protests, I meant.
Oh yes, widespread protests, even riots. People were being pushed off land their families had used for generations. It caused huge social disruption.
It's surprising, though, reading the sources, that fancy new machinery wasn't the main driver of this initial agricultural boom. It was still mostly hand tools.
That's a really important point. We think of revolution, we think machines. But early on, the big gains weren't from tractors or anything like that. They didn't exist yet. It was mostly improvements to hand tools, like the scythes for harvesting, combined with those smarter farming practices. The crop rotation, the enclosures, human and animal power just used more effectively.
So how does all this agricultural change, more food, cheaper food, people pushed off the land, connect directly to igniting the Industrial Revolution?
It connects in a few crucial ways. First, more food at lower prices meant ordinary families, for the first time maybe had a little extra money, disposable income.
Ah, so they could actually buy manufactured goods?
Precisely. It created consumer demand. Second, and critically, the enclosure movement created a massive supply of cheap labor. All those displaced rural families had to go somewhere.
To the towns and cities looking for work.
Exactly. They became the workforce for the new factories, desperate for any job they could find. So the agricultural revolution provided both the consumers and the workers needed for industry to take off.
That makes so much sense. You need the demand and the supply of labor. Okay, so that helps explain the timing. But why specifically England?
So,
Mr. A's class needs to know this. The sources list 5 key reasons, right? A unique combination.
yes, England had this confluence of factors that no other nation quite matched at that time. First, as we just discussed, the agricultural revolution. It fed the population and freed up labor. That's pillar 1.
Pillar 2.
The population growth itself, combined with that enclosure-driven migration, created this huge, concentrated, and importantly, cheap labor supply ready for the factories.
Got it. Labor supply. What else?
Third, capital. Money. England had a ready supply of investment capital from centuries of trade and empire building. Entrepreneurs could actually get the funds needed to build factories, buy machines, take risks.
Okay, capital. Pillar 4.
Natural resources. England was lucky. It had lots of rivers and waterways, initially for water power, but also crucial for transport. And critically, it had abundant, easily accessible coal, fuel for the future.
Coal and water. Very important. And the last pillar.
Markets. You need somewhere to sell all the stuff you're making. Britain had a growing domestic market, thanks to that population growth and slightly more disposable income. But it also had this massive colonial empire.
Ah, ready-made customers overseas.
Ready-made, often captive markets. They could sell goods across the globe, allowing industries to scale up massively.
Yeah.
So agriculture, population, capital, resources, markets. England had the full package.
A perfect storm, as you said. Okay, so the stage is set. Now let's talk about the actual engine of change. It really starts with textiles, moving from the old cottage industry to factories, and then the big one, steam power. Tell us about the cottage industry first.
Right. For centuries, making things like wool cloth was done literally in cottages, in people's homes. Small scale, family-based, maybe a spinning wheel, a hand loom.
Setting their own pace, presumably.
Exactly. More autonomy. But it was slow, incredibly inefficient, and just couldn't keep up with the growing demand we talked about. It was a bottleneck.
And bottlenecks invite innovation. This is where that chain reaction of textile inventions kicks in. It's fascinating how one invention created the need for the next.
It really is a cascade. First, in 1733, John Kay invents the flying shuttle. It made weaving much faster, needing only one operator instead of 2.
Okay, faster weaving, problem solved.
Not quite. It created a new problem. Weavers were now so fast, they were constantly waiting for yarn. They outpaced the spinners.
Ah, the yarn famine.
Exactly. So 1764, James Hargreaves comes up with the spinning jenny. One machine could spin multiple threads at once, trying to catch up with the weavers.
Okay, more yarn, but still limitations.
Yeah, jenny yarn was a bit weak. So 1769, Richard Arkwright invents the water frame. This beast could spin over 100 strong threads at once, but it was big, heavy.
Needed more power than human hands could provide.
Precisely. It needed water power. And that meant you couldn't have it in a cottage anymore. You needed a dedicated building, a factory located next to a fast-flowing river. That's a massive shift, the birth of the factory system, really.
Factories by rivers, so we've got strong yarn being spun quickly. What's next?
Well, now the weavers needed to keep up again. So 1785, Edmund Cartwright patents the power loom. Mechanized weaving, much faster cloth production.
Okay, spinning and weaving are getting mechanized. What about the raw material? Cotton, mainly?
Yeah, cotton was becoming king. And the big bottleneck there was separating the fibers from the seeds. Incredibly laborious. Until 1793, when Eli Whitney, over in America, invents the cotton gin.
Which sped up cotton processing massively.
Hugely. Suddenly, there's a much larger, faster supply of raw cotton available to feed Britain's hungry textile machines. The whole process, from field to finished cloth, is getting faster and more industrialized.
It's clear water power was essential for those early factories, like Arkwright's. But relying on rivers must have had downsides.
Oh, definitely. Geography was a huge constraint. You could only build factories where there was suitable water power, often remote locations.
And the weather.
A constant problem. Rivers freeze in winter, stopping everything. They run low in summer, same result. Reliable, consistent power was a major issue. Water power was cheap, but it wasn't flexible or dependable year-round.
Enter steam power, the iconic symbol of the whole era. This is what breaks the dependence on rivers, right?
Exactly. Though it took time. Early steam engines, like Thomas Newcomen's from 1712, were mainly used for one specific job, pumping water out of coal mines.
Important, but limited.
Very. They were inefficient, expensive to run, prone to exploding sometimes, and just did a simple up and down pumping motion, not useful for driving factory machines.
So it was James Watt who really cracked the code.
Yes, James Watt's improvements were revolutionary. First, in the 1760s, he added a separate condenser, which made the engine vastly more fuel efficient, less coal needed.
Okay, more efficient, but still just pumping.
Initially, yes. But the huge breakthrough came in 1781. Watt, working with Matthew Boulton, developed a steam engine capable of rotary motion, turning a wheel.
Ah, that's the key for driving machinery.
That's the key. And by 1788, he added a centrifugal governor to regulate the speed, making it smooth and consistent. Now, you had a reliable, powerful engine that could run factory machines anywhere you could get coal. Liberation from the riverbanks.
But the sources mentioned textile mills were actually a bit slow to adopt steam initially. Why was that, if it was so much better?
Well, a couple reasons. Early steam engines were still really expensive to buy and install, and many factories already had significant investment sunk into water power systems, which were essentially free to run once built.
Inertia, basically, and cost.
Right. Why fix what isn't broken, or at least what's already paid for? But as steam engines got cheaper and more efficient, and as the demand for production grew ever higher, the advantages became irresistible. By 1830, steam power had decisively overtaken water power in industry.
And steam power didn't just transform textiles. It had this symbiotic relationship with coal and iron, didn't it? Feeding each other's growth.
Absolutely. It's a perfect feedback loop. Steam engines needed huge amounts of coal, driving up demand and encouraging deeper mining.
And steam engines helped get that coal.
Exactly. Steam-powered pumps kept the deeper mines from flooding, and steam power could haul the coal out. More coal meant cheaper steam power, which meant more demand for coal.
And iron.
Same dynamic. Steam engines powered bigger, hotter blast furnaces, allowing for mass production of cheaper, stronger iron. And that better iron was needed to build more efficient, more powerful steam engines. They drove each other forward relentlessly.
Okay, so we've got efficient agriculture, a ready workforce, capital, resources, booming factories powered by steam. But how do you move all the raw materials in and the finished goods out? The old roads weren't up to scratch, were they?
Not even close. Imagine trying to move tons of coal or iron or textiles over bumpy, muddy tracks. Hopelessly inefficient. This leads to the transportation revolution. First phase. Canals.
Man-made rivers. The industrial arteries.
Pretty much. Canals were a huge leap forward. A barge on a canal could carry maybe 40 tons, far more than a horse and cart. The Bridgewater Canal, finished in 1761, is the classic example.
Built to get coal to Manchester, right?
Exactly. And its success was staggering. The price of coal in Manchester dropped by 50%. That sparked canal mania, a frenzy of canal building in the 1790s, linking major industrial towns.
But canals had their limits too, like water wheels?
Same problems, really. They could freeze in winter, run dry in summer, and different canals were built to different widths, so barges couldn't always move between systems easily. Good, but not perfect, especially for things that needed to move fast.
Which brings us to the railways. Steam power on wheels, transportation 2.0.
That's the one. People had experimented with carts on rails, sometimes pulled by horses, for years, mainly in mines. But combining the steam engine with iron rails, that was the revolution.
Trevithick, Stephenson.
Yeah.
Names we associate with early locomotives.
Right. Richard Trevithick built a steam locomotive way back in 1801. George Stephenson's engines in the 1810s and 20s really pushed the technology forward. But the moment it all clicked commercially, the real landmark, was the Liverpool to Manchester Railway in 1830.
Why was that particular line so important? It wasn't the very first railway line ever.
No, but it was the first purpose-built steam-powered railway connecting two major industrial cities. It proved railways could be fast, reliable, and crucially, profitable. And here's a surprise. Initially, it made more money from passengers than from freight.
Really? People were that keen to travel by train?
Absolutely. It opened up possibilities for travel that simply hadn't existed before. Its success triggered railway mania.
Right, these huge bursts of railway building in the 1830s and 40s.
Massive investment booms. Thousands of miles of track laid across Britain. It consumed huge amounts of iron, coal, labor, a massive economic stimulus in itself. And then Britain exported the technology, the materials, the engineers, building railways all over the world.
Beyond the economic boom, what were the social impacts? How did railways change everyday life?
Profoundly. To run timetables, they needed standardized time across the country. So railway time ended local time variations. That's huge.
Creating a more unified nation in a way.
In a very practical way. Suburbs started developing because people could commute into cities for work. Travel became possible for ordinary people on a scale never seen before, trips to the seaside, visiting family.
Though some elites worried about the masses moving around too much.
Oh, yes, concerns about social unrest. But it also sped up communication mail, newspapers moved faster, it helped break down regional differences. The country felt smaller, more connected.
So railways didn't start the Industrial Revolution,
No, the foundations were already laid.
but they absolutely accelerated it, allowed it to continue growing, knit the whole industrial nation together.
Couldn't put it better myself. They were the essential infrastructure for the next phase. They even improved diets, believe it or not, by allowing fresh food like fish to be transported inland quickly.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've built the foundations, fired up the engines, connected the country. Now we have to turn to the core of Mr. A's question, the human impact. The opportunities versus the severe hardships. This is where it gets really stark, starting with life inside those factories.
Yeah, this is the sharp end of industrialization for most people. The reality was driven by one thing: profit. Factory owners aimed to maximize production and minimize costs, and costs often included worker safety and well-being.
So what did that mean in practice? What was a typical day like?
Brutal. We're talking 12, 14, sometimes 16-hour days,
Right.
6 days a week. The schedule was dictated entirely by the machines, incredibly rigid,
We had breaks.
minimal. Maybe 30 minutes for breakfast, 30 for dinner, eaten by the machines often. No leaving your station, sometimes fines for talking or whistling. It was relentless, dehumanizing.
And the pay for this ordeal? You mentioned it was low, especially for women and children.
Shockingly low. A man might earn 15 shillings a week, maybe. Women doing similar work, maybe 7 shillings. Children, as little as 3 shillings.
Why the preference for women and children then? Just because they were cheaper?
Primarily, yes. Cheaper labor. Also, children were small, they'd get into machinery to fix things, and frankly, they were easier to bully and control. Some owners even deliberately fired boys when they got older to avoid paying adult wages. It was ruthless exploitation.
And the discipline. The sources describe horrific punishments, not just fines, but physical violence.
It's hard to even comprehend today.
Yeah.
Overseers used strapping, hitting workers with leather straps. For children, it was even worse. We read accounts of iron weights hung around their necks, being hoisted to the roof in baskets, even having their ears nailed to tables.
That's barbaric.
Absolutely. Dousing them with water to keep them awake. Fines for everything. Some sources even claim clocks were rigged to make workers late so they could be fined more. Overseers might even have fine quotas to meet.
It's sickening. And the physical danger beyond the punishments, accidents must have been constant with all that machinery.
Constant and horrific. Machines rarely had safety guards. Children were sent crawling into moving parts. Limbs were crushed or torn off. Scalps ripped away if hair got caught. The stats are grim. One source says 40% of accidents treated at Manchester Infirmary in 1833 were factory-related.
And the factories themselves were unhealthy places. Hot, noisy, dusty.
Extremely. Cotton mills were kept hot and humid for the thread, which led to lung diseases like pneumonia, especially going out into the cold night air after a long shift. The air was thick with dust, causing chronic chest problems, brown lung, and the noise, deafening. Many workers suffered permanent hearing damage.
Then there were the parish apprentices, urchins basically sold into factory labor.
Essentially, yes. Treated like child slaves, as the sources put it. Shipped from workhouses, often far from home, forced into 12-hour shifts, sleeping in horrible barracks, sometimes in beds still warm from the previous shift worker. It's the reality Dickens captured in Oliver Twist.
It's hard to see any opportunity in this for the workers themselves, just pure hardship.
From the worker's perspective, overwhelmingly hardship. The opportunity was simply survival, earning enough to not starve. For the owners, of course, it was an opportunity for immense wealth. But the human cost was staggering.
That brings us squarely to child labor. It wasn't just the parish apprentices. Huge numbers of children worked. Why was it so common?
It boils down to family poverty. Wages were so low that families literally couldn't survive unless everyone, even very young children, earned something. It was a desperate necessity for many.
And the jobs they did were incredibly dangerous, not just simple tasks.
No, far from it. They operated heavy, complex, dangerous machinery. We talked about the accidents, crushed limbs, deaths from explosions or being caught in machines. Cleaning machinery while it was moving was common and deadly.
And the treatment they received, on top of the danger.
Often brutal. Beatings, verbal abuse from overseers were common. Their safety was just not a priority. Add to that the health impacts, breathing toxic fumes, dust, leading to chronic illness, cancer, the long hours causing exhaustion, leading to more mistakes, more injuries.
Do we have numbers on how many children worked?
We do. The sources provide data, like from Lancashire Cotton Mills in 1833, over 400 children under 11 worked there, and over 2,200 between 11 and 16. It's just one area, one industry. It was systemic.
And the impact on their childhood, their innocence. There's that quote from Abraham Whitehead.
Chilling, isn't it? Testifying in 1832 about seeing a mill boy, not yet 6 years old, drinking ale in a pub, cursing and swearing like an adult. It shows this complete loss of childhood, premature exposure to hardship and vice. Political cartoons at the time also hammered home these evils.
So the only conceivable benefit, and it's a grim one, was helping the family survive.
That's the tragic reality. It was a symptom of desperate poverty, a terrible price paid for industrial progress.
As people flooded into towns for these factory jobs, the cities themselves exploded in size, often chaotically. Let's talk about urbanization and living conditions.
The shift was incredible. In 1750, maybe 15% of Britons lived in towns. By 1900, 85%. Cities like London, Manchester, Liverpool just mushroomed. London hit 4.5 million. This growth was way too fast for any kind of planning or infrastructure to keep up.
So housing was a nightmare, quickly built slums.
Exactly. Cheap, unregulated tenement housing thrown up as fast as possible, often back-to-back houses with no ventilation, built with shoddy materials, perpetually damp. Overcrowding was extreme home. Whole families crammed into single rooms. Multiple families sharing one room wasn't uncommon.
And basic sanitation, water, toilets.
Often non-existent. No running water inside, maybe one outdoor toilet or privy shared by dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. Often just overflowing cesspits, contaminating everything. Imagine the smell, the filth.
Which inevitably led to rampant disease.
Absolutely. Typhus, typhoid, tuberculosis consumption were rife. And then cholera arrived in the 1830s, a terrifying waterborne disease that caused devastating epidemics, killing rich and poor alike, though the poor suffered most. The overcrowding and filth were perfect breeding grounds.
And waste disposal in general was a disaster. Rivers used as sewers.
Completely overwhelmed, gutters filled with garbage, human waste, streets thick with horse manure, sewage flowed directly into rivers. The Thames in London became notoriously polluted. The Great Stink of 1858 literally stopped Parliament from meeting because the smell was so bad. Public water sources were often contaminated.
The impact on life expectancy must have been catastrophic.
The statistics are stark. In industrial cities like Liverpool in the 1850s, life expectancy at birth could be as low as 25 or 30 years. Manchester, maybe 35. It tells you just how deadly these urban environments were.
Let's shift focus slightly to the role of women. We know they worked in factories for low pay, but how did their role change from the pre-industrial era?
It changed dramatically. In the old cottage system, women often did spinning or sewing at home. They had some control over their hours, could balance work with childcare, and sometimes sold their own cloth. More autonomy.
But in the factories, they lost that control.
Completely. They became wage laborers, operating machines owned by someone else. And because mechanization often de-skilled textile work, their wages were pushed incredibly low.
We saw the figures maybe 5 shillings a week compared to 15 for men. That created huge economic vulnerability.
Huge. Women were heavily dependent on male earners. If a husband died or left, a woman and her children could face destitution. Prostitution was sometimes the only desperate alternative to starvation.
And physically, the factories were extra dangerous for women.
Yes, because of their clothing and hair. Long hair or dresses easily got caught in unguarded machinery, leading to horrific injuries or death.
We have that testimony from Hannah Good. What does she describe?
Her account paints a vivid picture, working from 5:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. Strict rules, seeing children beaten, constant exhaustion. It's a powerful first-hand glimpse into the sheer grind and hardship.
Yet, despite all this, women were a massive part of the workforce in certain sectors.
Oh, absolutely crucial. The 1851 census shows it clearly. Over 85% of domestic servants were women, 54% in the clothing trade, nearly half, 49% in textiles. They were the backbone of these industries, even if poorly paid and highly exploited.
All this upheaval inevitably reshaped the class structure, too. Before industrialization, class was mostly about land, right? A fairly rigid system.
Very much so. You had the landed aristocracy, the peasantry or farm laborers, and a small merchant professional middle class. Your position was largely fixed by birth. Social mobility was minimal.
But the Industrial Revolution blew that apart, created new ways to get rich and new forms of poverty.
Exactly. It introduced much more fluidity, for better or worse. A new wealthy class emerged, the industrial capitalists. Factory owners, mine owners, bankers, financing it all.
And these weren't necessarily aristocrats.
Often not. Many came from relatively humble backgrounds, inventors, merchants, even farmers who adapted, took risks, got lucky.
Hmm.
They built fortunes through industry, not inheritance.
And below them, a new middle class was also growing rapidly.
Yes, the urban middle class ballooned. Doctors, lawyers, managers, clerks, shopkeepers, the people running the administrative side of industry and commerce. Many were self-made men, proud of rising through hard work. They valued education, respectability, had distinct lifestyles, maybe even a servant, differentiating them clearly from the working class.
You see that aspiration in things like magazines showing the latest fashions.
Right, trying to emulate the upper classes, solidify their status.
So new opportunities for wealth and status for some. But the flip side was
A widening gap, a chasm, really, between the wealthy and the vast urban working class trapped in those slums we discussed. While some mobility was possible, for most working-class children, escaping that poverty was incredibly difficult.
why so difficult?
Lack of education, mainly. Education was the ladder up, but it was a luxury working-class families couldn't afford. Children needed to work from a young age just to survive. This lack of schooling locked them into manual labor, perpetuating the cycle.
Which leads us nicely to education itself during this period. Initially, pretty dire for the working class.
Dire is the word. In the 1700s, very few working-class children got any formal schooling. Families couldn't afford fees or even decent clothes for school, or the children were simply needed to work or beg.
What about the schools that did exist for them? Dame schools.
Often very basic, run by untrained women, more like childcare than real education. Minimal learning. Illiteracy was widespread, even when laws started appearing about education.
And factory owners often ignored rules about schooling for child workers.
Frequently. The law might say 2 hours of schooling a day from 1833, but enforcement was weak and profit came first.
But things did slowly start to improve. There was a growing sense that something had to be done.
Yes, over the 19th century, things gradually changed. Public outcry about child labor grew. The government started putting more money into schools. New laws mandated more hours of schooling, focusing on basic reading, writing, arithmetic.
And technical education emerged too, training for industrial jobs.
Right. As industry became more complex, the need for skilled workers grew. Technical schools were set up to provide specific industrial training, offering another potential route for advancement for some.
And for the poorest, the ragged schools.
These were charitable efforts, like the one started by John Pounds, specifically aimed at providing free education to destitute children who had absolutely nothing. So yes, while starting from a very low base, educational opportunities did slowly expand, offering a glimmer of hope.
Okay, to make all these abstract points about hardship and opportunity more concrete, let's zoom into Whitechapel in late 19th century London. Using maps and individual stories really brings it home.
Whitechapel is a fantastic case study. It was this incredibly dense, diverse, dynamic, and often dangerous part of London. Charles Booth's poverty maps from the 1890s are amazing tools.
How do they work? The color coding.
Yeah, Booth colored streets based on the social class and living conditions of the residents. Black meant lowest class, vicious, semi-criminal. You see streets like Great Pearl Street marked black. The nearby, like Elder Street, might be red for middle class, well-to-do. It visually shows the stark segregation, rich and poor living cheek by jowl.
And the Ordnance Survey maps add detail about what was actually there.
Exactly. They show the physical landscape. You see Bishopsgate train station, the connection to the wider world. Factories, cocoa, tobacco, booths showing the industry. Spitalfields Market, the commercial heart. Churches, synagogues reflecting the diverse population. And crucially, loads of public houses, or PH symbols.
13 pubs. That tells you something about social life and maybe social problems too.
Definitely suggests pubs were central, but also hints at issues like alcoholism.
And George Duckworth's notes from the time confirm this picture.
They do. He walked these streets with Booth's researchers. His notes on Great Pearl Street confirm it was still black, full of lodging houses he called little better than brothels, home to thieves, bullies, and prostitutes. He also noted changes like well-to-do Jews moving into some areas, sometimes causing friction with existing residents. And he listed typical jobs: market porters, street sellers, cigar makers, tailors, bootmakers, many held by immigrants.
Okay, let's meet some individuals. First, Hezekiah Moscow, also known as Chinguk, the West Indian boxer. His story seems to show both opportunity and danger.
He's a fascinating figure, an immigrant from the West Indies, born mid-century. He worked as a lion tamer at one point at the East London Aquarium.
A lion tamer, seriously?
Yep. Though he got charged with cruelty to bears, apparently case dismissed, but it hints at the rough edges of the entertainment world. But his main fame came as a boxer.
Chinguk, the colored champion.
That was his fighting name. He was successful, drew big crowds, performed with world champions like Sam Baxter. There are photos of him showing he had a public profile. It demonstrates that fame and some economic success were possible, even for an immigrant of color, in areas like entertainment and sport.
But his personal life reflects that working-class vulnerability we talked about.
Absolutely. Despite his fame, the 1891 census shows him living with his wife, Mary, in just 2 rooms on Elder Street. And then in 1892, he vanished, just disappeared. His wife believed he'd met with foul play. It starkly shows how precarious life was, even for someone with some success. One disappearance could plunge a family into crisis.
Which leads us to his wife, Mary Madden, or Mary Moscow. Her story is one of relentless hardship, especially after Hezekiah vanished.
Mary's story is heartbreaking, and sadly, probably quite typical for many women in her position. Daughter of Irish migrants, born in London, married Hezekiah, living in those 2 rooms. Then he disappears.
And she's left destitute with a baby.
Utterly destitute. She wrote to a newspaper, Sporting Life, pleading for help just months later. Said she was earning only 7 shillings a week to support herself and her baby. 7 shillings. Impossible. She had to move to an even poorer street.
And later ended up in the workhouse.
Yes. Records show her admitted to Tower Hamlets workhouse in 1908 with a septic wrist, needing institutional charity just to survive illness. By 1911, she's a widow, working as an office cleaner, lodging with her daughter. Just a constant struggle against poverty and illness. Her story really illustrates the extreme vulnerability of working-class women, especially widows and immigrants.
And their daughter, Eliza Moscow. Her life shows the path for a child born into this.
Eliza's life trajectory is very telling. Born 1891. At age 4, she's admitted to George Yard School, a ragged school, specifically for destitute children. That tells you everything about their circumstances.
So some education, but the most basic kind, for the poorest.
Exactly. Later, she went to another local school. But by age 19, in 1911, she's working alongside her mother as an office cleaner, still lodging. Entered the workforce very young, doing low-paid labor.
And later in life?
By 1939, she's married, listed as performing unpaid domestic duties, likely a housewife. Her path shows that limited education often led directly into low-wage work, perpetuating the cycle of hardship, though marriage perhaps offered a different kind of stability or dependency.
Finally, Alexander Monroe, another boxer, Jamaican immigrant connected to Hezekiah. His story adds another layer of complexity, community, but also violence.
Monroe's story is dramatic. Arrived from Jamaica around 1870. Known primarily as a boxer, a pugilist, but lived a very precarious life, on and off, in a common lodging house on Little Pearl Street, one described as a resort of thieves.
So right in the heart of that black area on Booth's map.
Exactly. Shows the transient, rough housing conditions many endured. But he was respected in boxing circles. Apparently, he helped Hezekiah Moscow get started in boxing.
Yeah.
Shows a kind of mentorship, community, even in that tough environment.
But his end was violent.
Tragically so. Stabbed to death in the lodging house kitchen during a drunken argument in 1885. And disturbingly, the landlord didn't even call the police initially. Suggests violence was maybe normalized or there was deep distrust of authorities.
Yet his funeral was huge.
Astonishingly so. An estimated 20,000 people turned out. Shows he was incredibly popular, a real figure in the community despite his circumstances. The Professional Boxing Association helped pay for the funeral. So again, you see this mixed opportunity and fame through boxing, but lived amidst poverty, crime, violence, yet still strong community ties. These lives really show the tangled reality of opportunity and hardship coexisting.
Okay, putting it all together, the innovations, the factories, the cities, these individual lives, we come back to that central question for Mr. A's students. Was the Industrial Revolution ultimately more beneficial or more harmful? It's clearly not a simple yes or no answer.
Not remotely. It's full of contradictions. You have undeniable progress, technological leaps, massive increases in production, the foundations of modern wealth. But you also have immense suffering, the brutal factory conditions, child labor, deadly urban environments, the widening gap between rich and poor.
So how did people at the time make sense of it? Different ideologies emerged to explain and respond to these changes, right? Starting with the capitalists themselves.
Right. The capitalists, the factory owners, the entrepreneurs generally saw it very positively. Their ideology was built on ideas like free trade, private ownership of the means of production factories, land, capital, and crucially, laissez-faire.
Let it be, let do.
Minimal government interference.
Exactly. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations argued that individuals pursuing their own self-interest, driven by competition, would unintentionally benefit society as a whole. The invisible hand would lead to needed products, better quality, lower prices, jobs, economic growth.
So from their perspective, factories were creating wealth, providing jobs. Workers should be grateful. That was often the attitude. They'd argue they were driving progress, making goods cheaper and more available. Concerns about hardship were often downplayed or seen as unavoidable side effects, or even the fault of the workers themselves.
And thinkers like Thomas Malthus added a layer of caution, even pessimism.
Yes, Malthus worried that population growth would inevitably outstrip the food supply. He argued that trying to help the poor, say by raising wages, would just encourage them to have more children, making the problem worse in the long run.
So natural checks like famine and disease were necessary, in his view. Grim.
Very grim. But it reinforced the capitalist resistance to things like minimum wage laws or welfare. They saw intervention as counterproductive, interfering with natural economic laws. Overall, capitalists believed the benefits of industrialization far outweighed the harms.
Okay, that's one perspective. What about the workers themselves? How did they respond to the hardships we've discussed? They didn't just accept it passively, did they?
Absolutely not. They experienced the exploitation firsthand, the dangerous conditions, the low pay, the preference for child labor because it was cheap and controllable. They knew factory inspectors were few and easily bribed, that ages were lied about. So they organized and protested, often facing brutal repression.
Like the Luddites, smashing machines.
Yes, the Luddites weren't just anti-technology. They were skilled workers protesting low wages and the use of unapprenticed labor who were undercutting them, enabled by the new machines. Their actions were targeted protests against economic injustice.
And then there was Peterloo, a peaceful protest met with violence.
The Peterloo Massacre in 1819 was a defining moment. Thousands gathered peacefully in Manchester demanding political reform, like the right to vote. Armed troops charged the crowd, killing and injuring hundreds. It showed the government's fear of working-class organization and willingness to use extreme force.
Which perhaps fueled movements like the Chartists, demanding political rights.
Exactly. The Chartists were the first major working-class political movement. Their 6 points of the charter included demands like votes for all men, secret ballots, no property requirement to be an MP. They wanted political power to address their economic grievances.
Did they succeed?
Not directly at the time. Parliament rejected their petitions repeatedly. The movement faded by the late 1840s as the economy improved somewhat. But it laid groundwork for future reforms and showed the growing political consciousness of the working class.
And alongside political action, labor unions started forming, workers banding together for better conditions.
Yes, unions emerged as workers organized collectively to fight for better wages, shorter hours, safer conditions. They used collective bargaining and, crucially, the threat of strikes.
But weren't unions illegal for a time?
They were. The Combination Acts around 1800 banned workers from organizing or striking, forcing unions underground. But these acts were repealed in 1824, leading to a wave of strikes as unions operated more openly. It was a constant struggle for recognition and rights.
So worker responses ranged from direct action to political organizing to forming unions. And new ideologies emerged, offering different solutions too, like socialism. How did socialists see the problem?
Socialism really grew directly out of critiquing the harsh realities of industrial capitalism. Socialists looked at the vast wealth being created and contrasted it with the extreme poverty and suffering of the workers. They argued unregulated capitalism was inherently exploitative, benefiting only the owners while causing unemployment, low wages, and misery for the majority.
So, unlike laissez-faire capitalists, they believed the government should step in.
Absolutely. Socialists advocated for government intervention to protect the working class and improve lives. Things like factory safety regulations, limits on working hours, minimum wage laws, public health measures. They believed the economy should serve the welfare of all, not just maximize private profit.
And some advocated for public ownership.
Yes, a core socialist idea is that the means of production, factories, mines, etc., should be owned by the public, usually meaning the state or community, and operated for the common good, not private enrichment.
What were the perceived pros and cons?
Pros included reducing inequality, providing social safety nets, potentially greater stability. Cons sometimes raised were reduced incentives for innovation, possible inefficiency, reliance on cooperation. But the key was reform and regulation within the system.
And then you have communism, emerging from socialism but proposing something much more radical.
Right. Karl Marx, the key figure here, saw history as driven by class struggle, the exploitation of one class by another. In industrial society, he saw the fundamental conflict between the bourgeoisie, the owners of capital, and the proletariat, the workers who sold their labor.
And he believed this conflict was heading towards
An inevitable revolution. Marx argued capitalism was inherently unstable and would eventually be overthrown by the proletariat. This revolution, unlike previous ones, would abolish private property entirely, leading to a classless society.
So no reforms. Revolution was the only way.
Exactly. Communists believed reforms were just tinkering, masking the fundamental problem, which was private ownership itself. Only a complete overthrow of the system and the elimination of classes could end exploitation.
How did they propose solving low wages?
Ultimately, by abolishing wages altogether, along with private property, which they saw as the root of all conflict and inequality. In their ideal communist society, resources would be shared based on need.
So very different proposed solutions, ranging from letting the market run free, to reforming it, to overthrowing it completely.
Precisely. These competing ideologies reflect the profound disagreements about the nature of the Industrial Revolution's impact and the best path forward for society.
It really highlights how complex that central question is: beneficial or harmful. There's no single, easy answer. It was simultaneously an engine of incredible innovation and wealth creation, and a source of immense hardship and inequality.
And who you were, where you stood in that society, whether you were a factory owner, a middle-class professional, skilled artisan, a factory worker, a woman, a child, an immigrant, dramatically shaped your experience and perspective.
So for Mr. A's students weighing this up, it's about understanding those different perspectives, the evidence for both opportunity and hardship, and the arguments made by people at the time. Thinking about all this, here's a final thought for you listeners to mull over. If you could travel back to, say, Manchester in the 1840s, knowing everything we've discussed today, who would you try to find first? A factory owner? A worker like Hannah Good? A reformer? And what single piece of advice would you give them, hoping to tip that balance even slightly away from hardship and towards opportunity? Something to think about.
A challenging question. It really forces you to consider where the leverage points might have been.
Indeed. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the Industrial Revolution for Mr. A's class. We hope this has been helpful in thinking through the complexities of Unit 3.
Good luck with your exams.